very much. Maybe I first of all should say, yes, I represent the AMAP Secretariat, and we serve all of the 8 Arctic Council member states, even if we are based in Norway, in Oslo. We also have full-time employees in Denmark, and the Netherlands, and Washington, D.C. So we're quite international. We cover quite a lot. In this presentation, I will talk about contaminants as such. You might hear me talk just about contaminants and POPs. All POPs are contaminants, but not every contaminant is a POP. So hope there's no confusion there. I will talk a little bit about the mandate which we have from the Arctic Council, because as probably all of you know, many of you are very familiar with AMAP. AMAP is one of the 6 working groups in the Arctic Council. Talk about monitoring programs. I'm not going that into depth about the AMAP monitoring program as we did for CBMP. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the assessments that we do and international conventions. Because talking about contaminants in the Arctic, you just can't talk about within the Arctic. What happens outside the Arctic is actually much more important than what's happened inside within the Arctic. So without international cooperation, without international conventions, there will be very little actually to do with contaminants in the Arctic. The mandate that we have from the Arctic Council is to monitor and assess the status of Arctic region with respect to pollution and climate change. And pollution in this aspect, one thing is contaminants. Radionuclides is another thing. We are within climate change. We are working both with greenhouse gases, black carbon, ozone, ultraviolet radiation. Lots of different things is covered within this. And we report our results back to the senior Arctic officials in the Arctic Council, but also many of the results that we produce about contaminants are reported to international conventions like the Stockholm Convention and the Minamata Convention on Mercury. I'll come back to that. This one is a little bit interesting. We saw the CAF area, and those of you who look very, very closely will see that the CAF area and the AMAP area isn't identical. It covers very, very much of the same, but it's not totally identical. And this is also just, one of the definitions of the Arctic. The Arctic Council itself doesn't really have a fixed definition of what is the Arctic. If you go to people on lower latitudes and you ask them what is the Arctic, they think north of the polar circle. That's the Arctic, but it's lots of different definitions of the Arctic. But this is the red line there is what we mostly work within, where we have our monitoring stations, where we do our assessments. And at least a little bit interesting, which you probably also saw on the CAF map, is that little one here. There it is. Yeah, thank you. This one. Yeah, that's to include, as you probably know, the Faroe Islands into the Arctic. AMAP has developed a trends and effects monitoring program. It has been agreed among the Arctic Council member states, and we try to perform as good as possible within this monitoring program. But this is quite a huge program. It's a long list of contaminants which the countries should monitor, both in air and sediments and biota and snow and ice and water. So nobody really can do the monitoring which is included in the trends and effects monitoring program. Therefore, they have to produce or to make a national implementation plan. All monitoring are performed by the member countries themselves. All funding for the monitoring is from the member countries or member states. AMAP as such, the same with CAF, and it doesn't have the money to do the monitoring. That's the responsibility of each country. So when you have a huge list of both locations and substances you want to monitor, then you have to pick some of them. What is most important? Where do you have research? Where do the different countries have their monitoring stations? And try to move a little bit further. And one of the things which is maybe really difficult for many countries, that is to include the emerging contaminants. I'll come back to that a little bit later. But monitoring, as all of you know, is about long-term work, and it's very, very difficult to skip out some substances from a monitoring program because you want to include some. But there's a need to include new substances. What do you do then with the legacy crops? So why monitoring in the Arctic? This one is really important. It's about what I said. We have to look outside the Arctic to understand what's going on inside the Arctic. As you can see from this slide, the light gray one are the air flows into the Arctic. The red and the blue one are the ocean currents, and these ones are the river catchments in Russia, Canada, Alaska. Maybe especially what it's looking for into the future now is the freshwater inflow, the big rivers into the Arctic Ocean, both because of permafrost melt, release of contaminants, which follows the rivers out to the Arctic Ocean, and a possible increase of freshwater input, and what that will have to say for the ecosystem as such, and for the sea ice. So, and the one there to the left, to the right, this is the discharges from Sellafield reprocessing plants in UK, and this is technetium 99, if I'm correct. How the discharges from Sellafield in UK goes along the Norwegian coast and further into the Arctic Ocean. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about, and some people get really surprised when they see this. There's probably no surprise for most of you. But this is a view from the Zeppelin air monitoring station in Svalbard. It's very clear, nice day. Just a few days later, the view looked like this, and that everybody thought that was just a fog, a normal foggy day. A few days later, they analyzed the sampling and what actually was in the air, and it was lots of pollution. So this is actually pollution in Svalbard. So where did it come from? Norwegian Institute for Air Research, I think it was, calculated then the air. Where does it come from? And it shows out to be forest fires in southeastern Europe. In just a few days, all the contaminants there from that forest fire reaches Svalbard. Svalbard is up there. So it really shows how important it is to know what's going on in lower latitudes before you can actually assess the levels that you see in the Arctic. And this is not only in Svalbard, but all over the Arctic. As you saw from the previous slide, the prevailing wind conditions is into the Arctic. Going into some of the substances we are working with. Mercury is one of the substances AMAP and AMAP experts group have been working with for a long, long time. Here we are back in the year 1200, and this is present day. So this is the Industrial Revolution. And it shows that approximately 95% of the levels of mercury we find in the Arctic today is man-made contributions. 5% of it is the baseline that we had up till 1900 approximately. And mercury is, even if we have the focus now is also very much on emerging contaminants. It's still, see, the legacy contaminants like mercury, like PCBs, which has the highest levels, and we're far away from having, say, control of these levels in the Arctic. Let's say they undergo long-range transport, they have a high dietary exposure, and that's very important. The metal mercury you find in the highest trophic levels is, together with PCB, maybe the two most important substances to regulate dietary requirements to especially seafood. International actions, as I said, very important, and the Minamata Convention on Mercury, when the United Nations Environmental Programme worked with that, they used lots of AMAP data from the Arctic, and at the end of the whole process we got a letter from the UNEP Secretariat and thanked AMAP very much for the contribution to the international, to the Minamata Convention. And it's also more or less the same with the Stockholm Convention on the dirty dozen, the POPs prohibitions. And Stockholm Convention, it's needed to have long-range transport actually to be listed on the Stockholm Convention, and therefore monitoring in the Arctic is very important. This one is unfortunately a little bit old. I'm looking for updated data, but it shows the global emissions of mercury from Africa, Asia, Europe, and things like that. And of course, as you immediately see, Europe has decreased their input, North America has decreased their emissions, nearly everybody else but not Asia. And most of these are coal-fired power plants in China. And China opens one coal-fired power plant a week. Then whatever we do in the rest of the world, the global emissions will increase, because as you know, mercury emissions is one of the main sources of coal-fired power plants. So international conventions, what happened outside the Arctic, is extremely important for how to assess both ecosystem levels and what's going on within the Arctic. A little bit about the monitoring stations that we have in the Arctic. These are air monitoring stations. These are locations we have collected samples from human blood, and this one shows the locations where we have time trends for biota in the Arctic. And if you have looked rather closely, you will see there's one huge area we are missing, Russia. And if we're going to really do this properly, we have data from Russia, but the problem is to get time trends. That's really difficult. But as you saw from this one, we do have samples from the human blood in Russia, but it shows one of the difficulties we have with the, let's say, national implementation plan from our trends and monitoring program. It's about priorities, it's about funding, and we have to rely on each member state and what they do of national monitoring. This one is interesting. It's from this report we produced an update on the Stockholm Convention substances. And talking about Arctic change, lots of people here talked about Arctic change and the rapid Arctic change, and it's totally correct, but it's not all changes that is to the worse. Legacy POPs here, mostly no trends or decreasing. But when we look at the emerging contaminants, then you see some red, and the trends or levels are increasing. Not going into this very much, but these are the emerging contaminants we are looking at now for the emerging contaminant assessment, as the POPs expert group is working with now, and will be published next year. So as you can see, very many can monitor and continue monitor the legacy POPs and the legacy contaminants, but to go into a process of picking the new emerging contaminants, that's more difficult. Just a few more slides. Going into what's the changes in the Arctic. Many of you recognize this one and these areas as the 3 pilot areas in the adaptation actions for a changing Arctic project, which is one of the AMAP's main deliverables to the Arctic Council ministerial meeting next year. Looking at Arctic change and some of the drivers, some of these are also impacts, you might say. But climate change might be one of them. There are lots of other drivers of Arctic change, and I think that's very important, especially when we assess the ecosystem, what's actually going on, and what drivers are you looking at, and how do you weight the different drivers. Global pollution, one of them. Mining, up there, oil and gas, maybe the more local sources, which can also be local sources for contaminants, will have a bigger role in the future than it is now. Technology development as one driver is a huge question mark. How will that actually influence Arctic change? So, because of this, what I've showed earlier, is POPs a solved problem? No, absolutely not. There are still high levels of some of them, and it's a concern about food and water security, the high levels of POPs. Some people, and I actually meet people who say a monitoring program should primarily be to put data into a convention and to ban the substance. If you have banned the substance, you have solved the problem. I say, are you serious? Well, yeah, that's what we need monitoring for. You need monitoring long after to see how effective are these measures that have been taken, both on national and local level. So that's some misunderstanding some people have on what a monitoring program is. A changing Arctic, as I said, long-range transport compared to local sources. Maybe we will see more local sources in the future. Of course, you have some local sources already, and what about, let's say, a shipping accident or an oil and gas accident? It will be a very, very local source there, and then might be increasing in the future. Never know. The last thing I want to show you, it's a rather new tool for looking into contaminants, not only in the Arctic but all over. That more and more nations now establish their environmental specimen banks. Of the Arctic Council member states, 6 of the 8 member states have national environmental specimen banks. You do sampling, you put the samples into the freezer, you store them for many years. In 20 or 30 years' time, you realize there's a new substance you have no control of today. You take out the samples from the freezer, you analyze them, and you get the time-trained, both spatial and temporal time-train immediately. And it tells you a lot. Is the substance a problem? Is it not a problem? And you can see the time frame very quickly. So more and more countries have it. Also many of the observer countries in the Arctic Council, like Japan and China, have these specimen banks. And it's more and more international network on ESPs. And I personally really hope that this can be one of the tools the Arctic Council and AMAP can use in the future. then I think I'm very, very close. I'm the last speaker in the conference, so I hope most of you out there, not everybody is there. So yeah, thank you for listening.